At the risk of sounding extremely corny, Superman can lift some very heavy things. No one's doing any heavier lifting in this movie than John Williams.
I think John Williams deserves like 60% of the credit for why Superman is as good a movie as it is. Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deitch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is GenreVision. GenreVision is a weekly movie club where we discuss horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. And we are kicking off a new month, and that means a new theme with superheroes. And we're starting Superhero Month with arguably one of the most iconic and important superhero films, Superman 1978, and its sequel, Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut, because this is also a way to pay tribute to the late, great Richard Donner, who passed away last month, an absolute titan of the industry who has made a number of classic films, and some that maybe aren't classic, but are certainly beloved. And we wanted to honor him by doing this movie, which this is one of those movies that I thought was going to be very difficult to talk about, because it's the kind of movie that is such a watershed moment in cinema history that it feels like, what can we possibly say about this that hasn't already been said? I think we do have some observations here, particularly about Superman 1978. It's a movie that clearly was super important to a particular generation. For a lot of people, this will always be their version of Superman. And frankly, it's hard to argue with the first act or two of this movie, because it might be the best version of Superman in any medium.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. I mean, I think Superman is just a notoriously difficult character to adapt to any kind of live action format. I think as a cartoon character, Superman works extraordinarily well. But clearly, this was a different era for comic book cinema than we're in right now, just in terms of writers trying to grapple with how to take characters intended for pulp storytelling and bring them to like prestige blockbuster cinema. It was not an easy task to translate them, and they struggled. Even great writers like Mario Puzo, who worked on both movies that we're going to talk about today, struggled with adapting Superman's powers and his origins to film. So this being a year after Star Wars, I think they knew like they had to really break out an incredible opening, to really give it to people as soon as the lights went down. There is this really classical opening with the curtains parting and you seeing some of the old Action Comic stuff like that. That is a really beautiful moment. And I had totally forgotten it existed.
It's a nice meta moment of like, you're watching a movie and this is a movie that understands the history of what it's trying to do. Unlike so much superhero and pulp superhero adaptation before that, Superman 1978 immediately approaches it as like, we're taking this seriously. Unfortunately, I think that ethos has become kind of toxic in modern comic book cinema. Mm-hmm. But I think what was great about Richard Donner was that he understood that Superman was modern myth, that this was something akin to, Greek myth or the Bible. And he was like, I'm not going to treat this like a Saturday afternoon serial.
Alternate take, he was one of the people that helped Superman become modern myth.
Absolutely.
It wasn't just that it already was, this was a further development in the status of the character from pulp hero to modern myth.
Absolutely. But the classic example of Superman being modern myth is Michael Uslan, who was one of the producers on Tim Burton's Batman and has become inextricably linked with DC since then, was the first person to be able to get a college course going on comic books. And the way that he did that, his selling argument was talking to the board of directors, whoever had to approve it, and they were very dismissive, being like, these are funny books. And Michael Uslan's argument being like, talking to the head of the board was like, can you tell me the story of Moses? And the guy recounted it to him. And then he said, can you tell me the story of Superman? And the guy recounted it immediately, knowing it, and realized like, oh my gosh, like I see the connections between this, and the fact that I can recount the origin of Superman to you the same way I can recount the origin of Moses speaks to these being modern myth. And I think Donner got that in a way that had never before been seen in film, and particularly in this first about 45 minutes of the movie, which is the origin story, a thing that has been so derided at this point in modern comic book cinema, because so many superheroes, their origins are basically nursery rhymes at this point. Like, we all know them.
Right. They follow such familiar templates. But, you know, an important thing to consider about the first 45 or 50 minutes of this movie is that a solid 5 or 6 minutes of it is all like preamble. You've got your opening curtain and the explanation of the sort of like, pulp nature of it all. And then there's this just ass rocking theme by John Williams over this incredible credit sequence. Like, if Star Wars is going to blast people's, hair off their heads and like really sear them, Superman had to really up the ante and create something that was just as energizing, clearly inspired by Star Wars. Like, there's no question there.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's just, we're seeing space and a bunch of credits flying in. Very much like the actual Star Wars title flies in.
And then you have the classic sort of scene from space, long single take effects shot that opened up so many serious sci-fi films from the day. You know, you've got 2001, you've got Alien, you've got Star Wars, which all feature like models and miniatures and effects photography and these long shots to really sell you this like, oh my fucking God, like, would you look at this?
Well, and easily one of the key players in making Superman a success is John Williams and his score. This is again, this is something that feels like it doesn't need to be stated, but it's this good, it bears repeating. This is easily one of his best pieces of music.
That cue as we see the surface of Krypton and we get close to the dome, obviously it is, Thus Sprach Zarathustra inspired, but it never ceases to give me like goosebumps all over. It is so, so, so good. That
Krypton cue chills every time, because again, this movie is not starting with some big action thing or some big, mission statement about this being a fun, rousing, superhero punch 'em up adventure. This is setting myth going on, because it is this slow, beautiful overlook on this model miniature of Krypton, and the music is very knowing. It starts quiet and builds and builds and builds until it is just this angelic, you are walking through the gates of heaven moment.
Yeah, it is Wagnerian. And then the first line of dialogue that we hear, which is a complete mission statement, this is no accident, folks, is Marlon Brando going, "This is no fantasy."
Yeah, I mean, like, how can you argue that they weren't aware that we're taking this seriously? And by taking it seriously, it does not mean that everything has to be super serious and grim and dark. Like, it's taking it seriously by saying this stuff matters, and we want to do the best version of what we believe this character and his world is. And particularly for Krypton, or as Marlon Brando would say, Krypton. This is, all of this stuff on Krypton is extremely alien and unique, certainly for the time. It is a mission state. It's so bold that I think time has in some ways not been kind to it. I love it.
Yeah, some of this stuff, like the crystal stuff, you can tell like, oh, that's just like a plexiglass tube that they chopped off. There are certain things.
Well, particularly for you.
Yeah, there are certain things about it that haven't aged well, but the intentions have aged beautifully. For instance, there are these costumes that they wear that are all made out of the reflective, like movie screen, like projector screen material. And so they reflect all the light back into the lens. The only trouble is like all of the costumes just immediately draw your eye. And so you're not looking at the performers actually performing anymore. You're just looking at their insane costumes. And I was like, in close-ups, like when they're setting up these important things like that, I think it works against the performances. But there are moments like the color of the lights turns red as like Krypton starts to fall apart. all of the lights turn from white to red, and then the suits are glowing red, and it's like, okay. And it was kind of worth it for that moment.
It creates a definitive, unforgettable world. It's a take. Like that's what I love so much about this opening stretch of Superman, is that it's a take. It's a bold take for the time, and I think even now it stands out as a bold take. It's something that I don't think a lot of studios would take the risk on something that's this unique, but it feels genuinely alien, and it feels like it has set up a great foundation for the Superman character's origins. And of course, gets sent off in his rocket ship, which in this is just like some weird, almost like geological crystal shape, which is super cool. It's not like a spaceship.
Yeah, it's like this big spiky geode flying through space. It's pretty cool.
God bless the 70s and their weird approach to sci-fi, willing to be very psychedelic.
Another bizarre thing for this time, in this era, is that there's a huge sequel setup moment that we've just breezed past here, where Marlon Brando is talking to the 3 villains from the next movie. Very unconventionally for this time, they planned these 2 sequels together and shot them, in the same production schedule. That is until Richard Donner was fired during production of Superman 2, when almost before he had shot most of what he intended to shoot, and then they fired him because he didn't get along with the Salkinds. But for them to plan these 2 huge Superman movies, shoot them both at once, like that was really unconventional for 78.
Yeah, I believe there was a Musketeer set of movies that did the same thing. I believe directed by Richard Lester.
The Salkinds did 3, I think the 3 Musketeers and the 4 Musketeers together.
Yes.
And I think that was Richard Lester. Yeah.
Yes, we get this set up, which will come back when we talk about Superman 2.
Yeah. But to do that at this scale is really just unheard of. So
again, bold. Like this was a really bold, risky movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like now, obviously it's heralded as a classic, but looking back, it's like this, they made their tagline, you will believe a man can fly, which was basically an effects statement. Like, we're going to sell you on the effects of this movie.
And it worked. I mean, it really fucking worked. It was big swings, incredible miniatures, really like new methods of photography to capture what they needed to capture for this movie. And it all pretty much works. Incredible matte paintings. You and I are such suckers for matte paintings, but they're just never not cool.
But what's even better than the matte paintings is Richard Donner understanding that in order to create a character like this and turn him into a mythological character, is you need to shoot him in his world like he is a mythological character.
Yeah, there is this whole approach once, baby Kal-El lands on Earth and becomes Clark Kent, adopted by Ma and Pa Kent. There is this new style of shooting that the movie later on kind of has to abandon because of the city setting, but it kind of shoots it like this big painterly, like David Lean, John Ford thing, where you get the vastness of the plains and the waving wheat, very, very Oklahoma, very movie musical, wide aspect ratio event cinema for the time. It was very 1940s inspired. This is my favorite section of the film by far. And yeah, the young man that they got to play Clark for this section, unfortunately, his performance is kind of hindered by a couple things, or at least, changed significantly, because he was dubbed over by Christopher Reeve, and he's wearing prosthetics to make him look more like Christopher Reeve. And the most obvious of these prosthetics, and it's never looked good, is the false nose.
Nope.
The appliance they have on his nose just is never, it doesn't look good in any lighting. It's never blended well. It never quite matches skin tone. That's something that wouldn't be a problem today. People they wouldn't notice if it wasn't a recognizable actor. People would just think that dude looks like that. But at the time, I understand why they did it. And I think the effect is fine, but like in super close up, it doesn't really hold up.
Agreed, but there's some absolutely great things in this stretch. I agree with this is my favorite stretch of the movie as well, because as is seated in the Destruction of Krypton opening, Donner makes a mission statement that he is going to tell the story with color, and that there is going to be a point made that when you see a particular shade of red, it is going to be exactly where your eye is drawn, because this red is Superman. Mm-hmm. There's other reds in the movie, but this red is going to be Superman, and he is going to cut a slice out of the frame with this red every time you see him. From the opening when he is being shuttled away as a baby, he has this, is the cloth, the red, yellow, and blue, and the red is extremely prominent. When he lands as a baby, and he's got this this red cloth draped around the bottom part of his body, and he's lifting up Mom Pa Kent's truck. It just cuts through. When we cut to him being a high school student, his jacket is this bright red. It's the only, there's red elsewhere in the frame, but this red is cutting through the imagery, and it's beautiful. It's something.
Yeah. It's storytelling through color is what it is.
Exactly.
It's just awesome. Yeah.
And that's the thing, is that you will understand the narrative weight of what's going on when that color is on screen. It creates a reaction in you.
Yep. And it continues, as a through line throughout this movie. In the second movie, it gets kind of lost, unfortunately, because you have, two directors' visions competing in the film. But this section of the film, the fact that it holds up as well as it does, and that I identify with it, as much as I do, is a huge surprise to me, because like this section of the film is Clark Kent as like this brooding teenager who's kind of surly and has to deal with like girl problems. And that, to me, I think on paper sounds like really tedious, but it ends up coming alive in a way I never thought it would. And they're telling the story in such broad strokes, and to see him run along the side of the train racing, like trying to get home in time and like beat all of these people he knows from high school home, and they're like, "How'd you get here so quick?" It's simple myth making, expected beats told in such a beautiful way
with such confidence.
Yeah, and it really surprises me, frankly, that my favorite things about the film and my favorite section of the film doesn't involve Christopher Reeve on screen at all. And that's not a knock against Reeve.
I'm with you, because, for example, we have to have the parental figure tells the young superhero, with great power comes great responsibility. You're meant for great things moment. And again, that's something that we've been so beat over the head with that a lot of people look at it completely as a joke. This movie, in one scene, a single exchange between Clark and Jonathan Kent, it wins it. It sells it perfectly. It's incredibly crisp and pointed and understands what it's doing. It's amazing. It's so amazing. Now, I will say, and this has always been a criticism of mine, I don't like that Jonathan Kent dies immediately after, passing on the "you're here for a reason" moment.
Yeah, it makes it seem like a Cliff's Notes version of the story, where you're like, oh, well, that, the coincidence of him dying right after that kind of exposes the nature of the fiction a bit.
Yes, and I don't like Jonathan Kent being dead during a majority of Clark's life. I don't think that's... I just, being somebody who's deeply embedded in Batman lore, for Superman, I've been like, well, Superman should be the polar opposite. Like, Superman should have his parents while he's an adult. They have a great, loving relationship. They're still there to be guiding forces in his life when he has moments of, when he has moral dilemmas or whatever. But I understand the reason for Jonathan Kent dying. And that is that, that motivating purpose of, hey, it makes him more relatable. It gives him a human edge to his godhood. Mm-hmm. It's like, yeah, like he may not be able to be hurt by bullets, but his dad dying is extremely disruptive and hurts a lot. And that's something that anybody can relate to.
Yes, of course. And then, things like the following scenes at the graveside, incredible. These scenes, however, would not be nearly as fascinating as they are without, again, the music, the presence of John Williams.
Oh God, yes.
Really elevating these scenes to just story. They just become stories about Titans. And they convey so much with just a simple phrase or passage in Williams' score.
Well, and the decision to really direct this stuff like it's a John Ford movie.
Yeah, fucking locations. Oh my God. Said.
The locations in this are just so amazing. And I miss people like actually going out to giant fields in the middle of America to film something like this, because there's a shot where Clark is walking up to Martha Kent and is saying like, I'm going to go away because I have to, he discovers in the barn, the ship that he came in and everything. Right. And he decides that after Jonathan has died, that he has to go kind of, he has to go on his pilgrimage. This is when Jesus jumps from 12 to 30 moment.
Sure. Yeah.
In the Bible. And this shot of him walking out to Martha in this field, the shot is like one shot for so long while they have this incredibly important moment between them with a character who has had barely 2 lines of dialogue at this point in Martha Kent.
Yeah, the movie is doing so much storytelling through color, through framing, through blocking, through music, through light and location, and just it's all fucking perfect in this moment.
And in that way, it really feels like the best of comic book storytelling, where it's like, this is a panel that you can look at and get so much information at before you've ever read the dialogue.
Correct.
And so then, Clark goes off and goes to Antarctica and throws a green crystal and creates the Fortress of Solitude and gets to meet his ghost dad's floating head. And it's awesome. We have this like great, weird, again, psychedelic model of Marlon Brando's head that spins around as it comes into the camera. The eye inside the model is a time jump. This is amazing formalist like filmmaking.
The presence of Brando, the continued presence of Brando in both of these movies was something that surprised me, because my memory is like, oh, well, he's not in them much. But truth be told, he was in them way more than I remembered. Like, I was astonished at how much of a presence he was.
For sure. But then we time jump and Superman's now Superman and he's now Christopher Reeve. And it's impossible to talk about these movies without talking about Christopher Reeve, because he was kind of the dream narrative of casting, where it's like, we want to get somebody unknown. Like that was another big push from Donner, was he's like, I can't have somebody up there going, that's Burt Reynolds,
right. Yeah.
Like the person that has to be there has to be Superman. And that has to be somebody that audiences aren't familiar with. And Donner has just absolutely lauded so much praise about Christopher Reeve. Like, I was listening to part of his commentary on Superman 2, and he talks about, he's like, yeah, like God sent him to me. Like, Donner was very much about like, there is no Superman without Christopher. Like, he is Superman in every shape and form. And here's the thing. He is right. Christopher Reeve's Superman is perfect. He is a perfect encapsulation of the classical idea of what Superman should be. I don't feel the same way about his Clark Kent.
Yeah. His Clark Kent is very much a classic comedy character. It's a character from a different movie than we saw, Teenage Clark Kent. It is a construction of a persona that just doesn't seem to fit in the same film that we saw the last Clark Kent. And it is not a bad interpretation. In fact, I think it's pretty brilliant all around, but it seems incongruous, very much so. And it only gets more incongruous for me. This section of the film is just so damn different. And we don't meet, Superman. We don't meet the star of this film for, I think it's over 50 minutes. Yeah, 50 minutes in, that's the first time we meet Clark, played by Christopher Reeve. Just insane that a movie would make a choice like that. I mean, nowadays I feel like, you might have your, opening sequence, your big action beat at the opening, you meet your hero, and then they'll kind of reveal backstory, non-linearly. But to take the more linear approach like this is like, wow, they're really taking their time setting everything up beat by beat by beat in the expected order. And then we finally arrive at the sort of central heart of the film.
And I think that that's great for the first 45, 50 minutes of this movie, because unfortunately, when we get into movie 2, which I'm talking about the second movie in the first movie, movie 2 is not really that great to me. It's not bad. It's very, very different in a lot of tonal approaches and a lot of visual approaches than the first 45 minutes of what we saw, which to me, I think the first 45 minutes are perfect. Like, yeah. I really think that is a perfect movie. It's a perfect Superman movie. The back half of it, or really kind of the back 3/4, is much more mixed.
Yeah, it is mixing more influences into its whole, style. It's got screwball comedy in there, sort of old school, almost like Hawksian kind of screwball comedy. It's got Three Stooges in it because Lex Luthor and his tools, Ned Beatty's character and
Otis, yes.
Yeah, Otis and Miss Tessmacher. They're kind of like Three Stooges characters.
Well, I said to you, they're like Batman 1966 setup.
Yeah, that's true. Luthor is very Batman 1966, but Otis is a stooge. He's like the lost fourth stooge. It's crazy.
Yes, he's extremely. And here's the thing. Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor is having such a goddamn ball that it's really hard to dislike the movie anytime he's on screen.
Yeah, like he seemed to like what he was doing and got along with Donner very well, to the point that when he was asked to come back to do reshoots for Superman 2, he declined.
Yes, because he didn't want to be directed by anybody but Donner, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
But the entire antagonism of this section of the movie really doesn't work for me. The building of the relationship between Clark Kent, more appropriately Superman, and Lois Lane, however, is quite good.
It is, and I think the reason it's so good is that it's primarily from Lois's perspective. She is the main perspective character in this romance section, and that's great. Like this whole scene where they go on their first date, I suppose, where they go up in the clouds and fly and stuff like that. It's pretty beautiful, and to hear the actual voiceover of her thoughts, I was like, wow, I really do believe this admittedly corny section that she's falling in love with this character. Or just is overwhelmed with this, with how impressed she is by him.
I like that Donner understands that you can be mythic and big and important and not lose the heart of the character and his world. And that heart is cornball. Like it has to be. Like, it makes so much sense. So he can be extremely moving and sincere while still understanding that Superman is the kind of person that when he flies away from a situation, he'll go, bye.
Yeah, I love that.
That's great. And I mean, that's Reeves' performance. That's an understanding of the character being the big blue Boy Scout. Like, and Reeves plays it to perfection. Margot Kidder is so good as Lois and kind of, I think, a challenging role.
Yeah.
To be next to Reeves' performance and to play this perspective character and to be, primarily just a romantic interest. She injects so much fun and personality into Lois. And I think
she's such a specific choice. I remember when they, when Bryan Singer did Superman Returns and he cast, I think it was Kate Bosworth in the role. I was like, really? You're missing such specificity. I understand you don't want to recreate Margot Kidder exactly, but like, she's such a specific choice for this character, who you could sort of believe as a reporter. They don't make her out to be this like, super girl power, like Pulitzer Prize winning reporter. She's not.
She
that.
Can't spell.
Yeah, she's misspelling words. She chain smokes, and she makes all sorts of these sexual innuendos. Like, how big are you? She asks him. We know what you mean, Lois.
I love those scenes, like them on Lois's balcony and just talking about Superman and each other and feeling each other out, and how it is really just childhood romantic fantasy while still, like you're saying, having these sexual undertones, overtones too.
Oh yeah. It's very grown up in some respects. Yeah.
It's
pretty obvious.
I mean, she asks Superman what color her panties are. And then eventually he's like pink because he couldn't see through lead at first. But I mean, Reeves's performance is so boyish. Like during that interview, she's asking him some question and they cut to a shot of him and he's sitting there like biting one of his nails.
Yeah.
It's so fucking good that it's a bummer that the big kind of plotty superhero movie that goes on is not as good as that stuff.
Yeah. There's this sort of like Looney Tunes vibe that follows Lex Luthor around. Like there's, like this whole plot where he's trying to launch the two missiles simultaneously. You're like, this is like Wile E. Coyote doing his like Acme shit.
Right. Yeah. This Acme gag didn't work.
It's very openly cartoony. Yeah.
Yeah.
And to have that contrasted with the extraordinarily straight-faced myth making of the movie's first half, or almost the first half, is like, there's more than one movie going on here.
It's unfortunate. And it unfortunately, obviously there's tired criticisms and not saying they're criticisms I disagree with about the last chunk of this movie is Superman going back in time to fix things and stuff like that. It's not great. I think there's great stuff in this section of the movie, but it's fewer and farther between than the just absolute nonstop cavalcade of greatness that we got in the first 45 minutes. And then that middle chunk when it's Superman being introduced to Metropolis, he's saving the helicopter from falling. And
yeah, I like that montage of him, like, saving the cat from the tree and stuff like that. I'm like, yeah, this is necessary to see the hero being the hero and just doing like a day in the life of Superman, like the normal stuff he's expected to do. And it's like, it helps put him in a necessary context of like how people of Metropolis see him. It's all very important.
And extremely well filmed. There's a cat burglar scaling a wall, and we're seeing from inside the skyscraper, and the camera, pedestals up just to see Superman's feet revealed, and he says
standing on the side of the building. It's brilliantly done.
It's so good.
There's no plot happening. There's no plot happening at all in this section of the movie where they're just like introducing him. It's all just to establish who he is and like what people think about him, just letting Superman be Superman with no semblance of plot happening with him. It's kind of unheard of in today's landscape.
It is. And as we said, the sequel was being shot at the same time. The intention was for Richard Donner to have directed both films and had a cohesive vision. That fell through. And when they came back to reshoot stuff for Superman 2, Richard Lester reshot a lot of stuff, and to the point where he is the credited director on Superman 2.
The theatrical version, anyway.
The theatrical version. Because we wanted to celebrate Richard Donner, we both decided to watch the Richard Donner cut of Superman 2. Now, here's the thing. I think either version of Superman 2 is kind of fundamentally flawed. And possibly just broken in no matter what version you see it. I think there's just a lot of stuff sequel-wise that doesn't work, and a lot of stuff on the movie's own terms don't work. The Richard Donner cut that we watched, primarily, it's very weird to see this repeated so many decades later with the Justice League film. Mm-hmm. A very similar situation, and so much as two very different versions of the film being released. For example, Richard Lester put in a lot more comedy stuff in his cut that Donner took out. And that was the same with the two versions of Justice League. I felt really, really bad watching Superman 2 because it is a very bad movie.
Well, I haven't seen the theatrical cut in so long that it's a pretty distant memory. Although, I remember how it made me feel, and it was like, that's not great. There's fun stuff in it. There's plenty of fun stuff in it, but like as a whole package, it ain't working.
Well, I will absolutely say there are good things in it, and there are some things I really love about Superman 2. And I think it's one of the things that most people took away from seeing Superman 2, probably when they were very young, are the villains, but particularly Terrence Stamp as Zod,
who's great, and his scene at the beginning of the first Superman is repeated in Donner's cut. And not only does that come back, there's Brando back, like theatrical cut of Superman 2, no Brando. Richard Donner's cut of Superman 2, lot of Brando.
Is Brando completely cut out of the theatrical version of Superman 2?
I don't know if it's completely, but I think the only stuff that you might see of Brando in the theatrical cut of Superman 2 is stuff that was featured in the first film. Here, there's a whole bunch of footage that was never seen before. I remember they uncovered it to use it in Superman Returns, which then kind of opened them up to be able to re-edit it into a new cut of Superman 2, which actually gave Richard Donner his credit. Donner put his stamp of approval on it, although this is not up to the same standards of editing as Richard Donner's Superman from 78. It's a different editor, obviously, and of course it was edited digitally, non-linearly, and that's normal, but it's no Stuart Baird editing. It's kind of a Franken movie.
No, I mean, it oddly feels like a fan cut of a movie.
Well, you're not wrong. A fan cut today would be put together in exactly the same fashion, except, the defining aspect of this is having access to all of Donner's original footage.
Sure. And other things. And it's unfortunate because yes, Terrence Stamp is great as Zod. I loved Sarah Douglas as Ursa. Like, she might be one of the secret weapons of the movie for me.
She understands the camp just as well as anybody else who's like, I think she understands the camp just as well as Terrence Stamp does. Nod is just this big, grunting guy. He's basically like Jaws from any of the Bond movies.
I was going to say, he's very, very, very Richard Kiel-esque.
Yeah.
I love, there's a little tiny detail of Ursa. She continually meets people of authority on Earth that, like a police sheriff with a badge or a general, and she continually rips off their adornments and then keeps adding them to her own suit.
She rips a patch off an astronaut on the moon, and the astronaut's suit blows up like a balloon. It's nuts. Really crazy.
She kickballs him into nothingness.
Yeah, which, compare that to the moment in the first Superman where Superman, punts the football like miles, and we're like, wow, that moment is incredible.
Yeah.
And then in Superman 2, like Ursa's on the moon punting astronauts. It's like, what the fuck happened here?
Well, yeah, Superman 2, the biggest crime is that Superman 2 is really boring.
Shockingly boring.
Now, granted, we're talking about the Richard Donner cut, so maybe some things are amended in the theatrical cut, but the version that we watched, it just feels like nothing is really happening for a big stretch. It's all this build, like the build is Superman and the other Kryptonians are going to fight.
Yeah.
And when that eventually comes around, there's some fun stuff, mostly of which we believe was shot by Richard Lester. The movie also has an entire other movie happening, which is Lois Lane immediately knows that Clark Kent is Superman, and she's going to try and make that, reveal that to Clark, essentially, that she knows.
Yeah, it feels very unearned. There's just a moment where she looks at him in the Daily Planet and then sees a picture of him in the paper and sees a picture of Superman in the paper and then draws a hat and glasses on him. And it's like, oh my God, I figured it out.
There was a seeding at the end of one where she thinks about, it's like, Clark's never around with Superman. And it's the moment, it's like, oh my gosh, has she figured it out? But then she goes, Lois Lane, that's the silliest idea you've ever had. And, and it feels like that build should have continued in Superman 2 if that's what they wanted to do. But it is like her first scene. She's like, oh, Clark Kent's Superman. I'm going to try and figure it, expose him to himself.
Right. It's not like that moment at the end of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man where Tobey Maguire kisses Kirsten Dunst in the cemetery. And then as Tobey Maguire walks away, she raises her hand to her face and we know she knows, those lips are familiar.
If she doesn't know, the suspicion has been planted.
And that's all we need to know.
And because Spider-Man 2, he still has to reveal to Mary Jane at the end of that movie that he's Spider-Man.
Yeah, but when she says somehow I always knew, it's like, of course.
Yeah, that's fine. But it would be like the opening of Spider-Man 2, Mary Jane at her play looking at Peter, like, and then looking at like a newspaper of Spider-Man and be like, he's Spider-Man.
That's not one-to-one, but I get what you're saying.
No, but
anyway, this Lois and Clark plot opens so horribly. And I don't mean to speak ill of the late Richard Donner. Clearly the man was capable of doing incredible things. But this sequence where Lois decides to test Clark by hurling herself out a window in the Daily Planet to plummet many stories and force Clark to jet outside and prevent her from falling to her death by blowing a very concentrated stream of air in a very Superman way, like causing her to land in a fruit stand and like smushing herself. I'm like, this is beyond stupid. Well, I hated that movie.
What was interesting is in the theatrical cut, that same beat happens, but it's after they are assigned to go to Niagara Falls, and she throws herself into Niagara Falls, and Superman comes in, and Superman doesn't come. Clark does the same thing where he does some setup where she gets saved without Superman showing up.
Yeah, and I forget which cut is it. Where she shoots him and he has to catch the bullet. Is that the cut we watched, or is
that's the cut we watched? Yes, in the theatrical cut, it's like something to do with a fireplace. There's a totally new scene that was shot.
In the honeymoon suite. Yeah,
yes,
okay.
And in the original cut and the one that Richard Donner reinstated, she shoots him with blanks.
Right.
And to reveal that he's I like that turn that she didn't actually shoot him, that she got him to reveal himself.
Right. That's something that I feel like is stupid, but not nearly as stupid as I'm just going to throw myself out a fucking window on a hunch.
Here's the thing.
Jesus.
This entire movie is its own movie, and it's something that deserves a lot more build and a lot more. it doesn't feel integrated into the other movie that's going on that frankly is the marquee thing that people showed up to see, which is, oh, Superman's going to fight other Supermen.
Right.
Like,
that have had this grudge against him and, his father for generations at this point. So, this whole subplot where Superman falls in love with Lois and, she learns his secret identity and he eventually decides to give up his power by stepping into, I don't know, the crystal phone booth at the fucking Fortress of Solitude. Like, there is good material to be mined from there. Like, they're just plain good scenes, but also thematically, that's interesting for Superman as a character. I like the potential of that plot. It's in the wrong movie. Spider-Man 2, for instance, does a much better job of, at the midpoint of the film, Peter Parker says, I'm Spider-Man no more. And he dumps his suit in the fucking trash. And you have some amazing sequences where he's struggling with no longer, having to be Spider-Man, or he's having to deal with letting people get beat up in alleyways and, making sure that he's not following, rescue vehicles to disasters. And
he's got hot dogs to eat.
Yeah, exactly. He's got hot dogs to eat. He's got bikes to fix, It's really wonderful stuff, and it lasts for such a short time comparatively, but is so well explored in that montage. But in this film, after Superman gives up his powers to be with Lois, and which feels at this point kind of unearned, they go to a bar somewhere. It's got to be in Canada, I guess. They go to a bar, and Clark, I don't know, having taken handfuls of stupid pills, decides to beat up some plaid-wearing trucker and gets his ass handed to him because he doesn't have superpowers anymore. And I'm like, this is more like Lois throwing herself out the fucking window. Like, why are these characters doing these stupid things?
A couple things that you've hit on that I want to react to. One, a big reason why Superman giving up his powers is bad is because the way that it's framed in the narrative puts all of the blame on Lois.
Yeah.
She is standing after her and Superman have had sex, and we know this because she walks out with his Superman. Her walking out with his Superman shirt on is fucking great.
Yes, it is. Yeah,
that's a wonderful image that belongs in a better movie. But she's standing on this cliff edge, looking down as Clark is talking to, or I should say, Superman is talking to Jor-El about I want to give up my powers because I love a woman. And Jor-El's like, to give up your powers for a woman? Come on.
That scene, by the way, where he's talking to the big head, it feels like it takes for fucking ever. The pacing in this movie is all off. It's so off.
So it's all framed as man, Lois has taken Superman away. And the immediate next scene pretty much is him getting beat up. And, because this trucker guy's being rude and insulting Lois and just being a general asshole. And he gets, beat up, and then immediately on TV sees Zod's made the president kneel to him and is calling out Superman. So the Lois thing sucks. The other thing that sucks is that comparatively to the first Superman, Clark Kent suddenly being this toxic masculine, I've got to beat up a guy who's being a dick to prove that, and because I can't do it, that makes me less of a quote man, is so in contrast with the kind of masculinity we see from Superman in the first movie.
Right. He's got such warm, quiet confidence, and he doesn't have to, project any sort of insecure bullshit. He's like, I like pink. And he means it genuinely. He's not just talking about her panties. He's like, I like pink.
No, he's a guy. I mean, it makes me think of that current Superman and Lois show. I only watched a section from the first episode, but I've heard very good things about its portrayal of Superman, and one of them being that the Tyler Hoechlin, I think is his name.
Yes.
That plays the lead. When we see his first appearance as Superman, and he's got the very classic, original comics Fleischer cartoon Superman suit, some kid goes cool costume, and he earnestly just goes, thanks, my mom made it. And it's that's Superman. And that is in Christopher Reeve in that first movie, when he's very just assured of yeah, this is who I am, and it's cool. I don't have anything there's no reason for me to puff up my chest. And that is so much of what appeals to me about the Superman character is it is a refutation of the idea that absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Sure.
It's the idea that absolute power has removed so many of the insecurities that come with humanity for this character, and to the point where it's actually made him a much better person. And it's the most idealistic concept you could have for this kind of fantasy. But in Superman 2, it really does become like, yeah, Superman likes being Superman because he can beat up assholes.
It is a stunning drop off. Mario Puzo gets another credit here for story and I believe screenplay as well. And it really, I think, brings to light just how much they were struggling to adapt this character to the format. You know, in the first Superman film, there are moments where after sort of the transformation into the Christopher Reeve version of the character, anything like this calmness, this assuredness, like cracks, and you see him get angry. You know, he screams in anger and then rockets up into the sky and is so mad he manages to spin the earth backwards and turn back time, which is kind of a stunning moment in pulp science fiction. Not a great thing, I think, in terms of storytelling, because once you give a character that kind of like godlike power, there are very few ways to write about it for the live action film format that come off as intelligent. Like, one of the most astonishing things about DC Comics is the way that they write about godhood. Like, if you read Alan Moore's run on Swamp Thing, the way that they talk about that character's ascension to godhood and just how overpowered he becomes, and like the steps they have to take in the rest of the world to deal with Swamp Thing as a god, like, that's important stuff. But you'd never be able to pull it off in a live action film in a 2-hour, running time.
Probably not. Never say never, but I think there's just so much about Superman 2 that chips away at what I really liked about the character in the first movie. And by the end of the Donner cut, and I totally forgot this, Donner brings back the ability for Superman to turn back time.
It's not as if he ever lost it. He just some he has. Like,
well, no, I think it was right in the theatrical version to not acknowledge that. Like, it being like that was a one-time thing because he was super pissed off, and there's all this talk from Jor-El, saying like you can't interfere with their history, like don't fuck with that. And but Lois is the only one that he would become so enraged that potentially out of his control he would do something like that.
Right. They set up this sort of emotional beats to get there. Like, it feels like an emotionally necessary beat at sometimes. Like, logically, of course, it makes zero sense, but it's not logic. It's superheroes.
Yes. So I agree with the emotional reason to do it in Superman 1. It's a thing that deserves, comic book YouTube criticism, but the emotional beat for the character works. In Superman 2, the Donner cut, it is bullshit.
Yeah, it is. And now in the theatrical cut, it's a magical kiss that wipes away Lois's memory of him, and his secret identity and all that kind of stuff. So it's just as much bullshit.
Also stupid.
Yeah, it's also stupid. Limitations to these powers are important. It's fun to explore the limitations of these characters' powers, but I think once you breach certain boundaries, you've done a bad thing. Like, the whole idea of like why Superman saves people in the ways that he does is because he knows if he fucks up that people are going to die. And if he can just turn back time to the point where Zod and, Ursa and Nod had not arrived on Earth, if he could just do that all along, then why be Superman at all? It doesn't make much sense to me logically, but again, I understand that logic is not the most important thing when we're talking about these movies, but it's such a misstep and a huge misunderstanding of the character, I think.
I can make an argument for it in the first movie as its own standalone thing, but doing it again in the second movie in Donner's cut is awful. It's so awful.
Now, it's hindered by the fact that they have to reuse footage from the first movie to complete this cut. The fact that it's such a blatant repetition of that beat only becomes more obvious because they have to reuse footage from the first film to, patch over that missing bit.
Sure. The thing is, I was extremely disappointed and bummed by the end of the Richard Donner cut of Superman 2. But if anything positive came out of it, it made me like the first Superman more.
Oh, yeah. The other thing I liked about it is that they went all in on Lex Luthor being kind of gay in this movie. There's a bunch of jokes at the expense of his, perceived homosexuality. And honestly, the movie embracing the camp of that works pretty well.
Sure. That's a fun thing. Lex Luthor is canon gay in Superman 2, at least the Donner cut in our mind.
famous gay Lex Luthor.
Sure, it's very fun. Him with his little ascot and
The prison jokes and all that kind of stuff.
all the prison jokes and him. It's fun. It's fun. Like, again, it's great to see Hackman having fun. Again, it's very difficult to dislike either movie when he's on screen. But yeah, Superman 2, the Donner cut, don't just watch the first Superman. And, frankly, maybe one day I will revisit the theatrical cut of Superman 2, but I think a lot of my criticisms stand about it structurally and the approach and changes to the character and stuff like that. But man, those first 45 minutes of Superman, I forgot. I went in going like, I remember this being the stuff I liked the most and it being really good. After this, it's like, I would watch that again, like just that section.
Those first 45, 50 minutes of Superman are my favorite thing Richard Donner ever directed in his entire filmography. And I like The Omen quite a bit. But this, cooked to perfection by everybody who was working on it. So I want to, pay tribute to the late Richard Donner by commending him on such incredible work and understanding the material and having all of the instruments play in concert.
Absolutely. Celebrate a great director. We will now move over to the shelf where we pick a movie that might act as a good pairing or substitute for our main topic. And we encourage you, loyal listener, to go to GenreVision.com and comment on this post with your own shelf pick, because the shelf is a collaborative effort here at GenreVision. If you do leave a shelf pick in the comments, we will feature it on next week's show. Travis, what are you going to pull off the shelf for Superman and Superman 2, the Donner cut?
Inspired by the Salkinds' success at making Superman, they decided to make Santa Claus. And we talked about this last year as our Christmas theme month, but this movie is kind of an unexpected effects extravaganza curiosity. It's directed by Juno Schwark, who is the guy that directed Jaws 2 and Bugs, which we talked about last week. But it's this huge fucking movie that is so similarly structured to the first Superman movie, where it's like multiple movies packed into one. The first, I think, hour or so of this movie feels entirely different. Again, it's all taking its time in chronologically setting up this origin story for Santa Claus as a character. Again, like, you look at some of the huge fucking sets they built for this and you're like, wow, that's kind of incredible. Movie's corny as fuck, but also I'm kind of astonished. Again, the matte paintings, you're like, oh my God, that's awesome. But then, then you realize the movie has like built an hour into its running time of like why Santa likes milk and cookies, or why Santa is a fat person, or like all of these things that are just like, why do you need so much time? Why do we need to know that the elves, for instance, are like hot swapping the beds? Like one elf gets out of bed and then the other elf comes off his shift in the toy factory and then has to sleep in the same bed as that elf that just got the bed still warm. Anyway, it's very creepy in a lot of ways. But one of the, actually, fuck it. The best thing about the movie is John Lithgow. John Lithgow shows up in the last 40 minutes of the running time as the big bad. And he is a better evil capitalist than Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor.
Bold take, one I agree with.
His performance in the movie is big enough to be seen from space, which is appropriate because that's the last shot of the movie is him floating off into space.
Yeah, buddy.
Yeah, it's so fucking good, dude. If you've never seen Santa Claus the movie, it is not a great film, but it is so worth it to see this most unhinged John Lithgow performance. You've seen John Lithgow play serial killers and, people with multiple identities and all these, different nutty things that he's done throughout the course of his career. But you have never seen him this unhinged with these big fake dentures chomping down on magical candy canes like there's no tomorrow. You will believe John Lithgow can fly. Anyway, that's my shelf pick. What are you pulling off the shelf?
Well, I mean, there's so many movies that were inspired by Superman that I think a lot of people will bring up, like Batman 89, or as we mentioned, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man owes an enormous debt to Richard Donner's Superman and knows it. Like, absolutely. I went back and forth with a lot of recommendations, such as like Batman 1966 movie, which I adore and I think is a great adaptation of the character for the time. But if the first 45, 50 minutes of Superman is the definitive Superman, I actually have to go with the television show of Batman the Animated Series, because for a lot of people, that is the definitive version of that character in his world. And certainly for me, like in any medium, comics, movies, anything, that is the best version of Batman to me, in much the same way that I feel that those first 45 minutes of Superman are the best version of Superman, possibly in any medium. There are a lot of great comics and stuff about Superman that I adore, but when I think of Superman, it's this Richard Donner stuff. This is the myth distilled perfectly. And I think that is reflected so much in Batman the Animated Series, where they understood that they couldn't have their character in what was an appropriation of modern day. They had to put him in this weird, timeless other world, which is so right for the character. And that they understood that they can tell serious Batman stories while not losing the fact that this is a story about a guy that dresses up like a bat and beats other themed villains.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that element is also there in the show and is treated comedically and treated seriously when it's appropriate. It shows the versatility of the character, and it's something that I continually come back to throughout my life. Like, I mean, I can't argue that nostalgia plays an enormous part in it, because this was happening when I was growing up, when I was like 3-4 years old. It was, that generation is so perfectly primed to be Batman enthusiasts, because I think of this show more than even the movies. It's that effective and that rewatchable. It's currently available on HBO Max. So is Superman the Animated Series, which I recommend. Not as good episode to episode, but another great interpretation of the character. Those guys at their best, they understood how to distill these comic book characters into very iconic, streamlined versions. So go check those out. Now it's time to move on to the listener shelf picks for last week's episode on Empire of the Ants versus Phase 4. Eric Fuchs went with Night of the Lepus and the Andromeda Strain. Cthulhu Ferrigno had Frogs and Squirm and Black Swarm. Eric Johnson went with Them and George Lucas's short film Electronic Labyrinth THX 11384EB. Hobb went with the Sand Kings episode of The Outer Limits. JT had Kingdom of the Spiders and The Hellstrom Chronicle. And Mr. Milksteak went with Bug and Frogs as well. Also Contamination, the 1980 Luigi Cozzi movie. Thank you, everybody, so much. Love having these shelf picks and looking forward to next week's for Superman. Now, just some quick calls to action, but stick around because we will be talking about the new Jungle Cruise movie, as well as what is possibly the GenreVision movie pick of the year. So if you love what we're doing here on the show, please rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts. It really is incredibly important to growing the show and keeping us out there in the wild west of podcasts. And if you do leave a written review for the show, we will feature it here on an episode. Please, we do this every week. We wouldn't do it if it wasn't important. If you like what we do, please leave that rating and review. You can also become a patron at patreon.com/GenreVision for just $5 a month, and you can get access to weekly pre-show episodes. We just did one on what we're planning to do for October's theme month, and threw some movies around and ideas. So go check that out by becoming a patron at patreon.com/GenreVision. You'll get bonus material for this show, all our GenreVision shows, tons of great stuff. Extended Currently Consumings every month. Good things going on over at patreon.com/GenreVision. And we also mentioned this in our last episode, but we wanted to say it for the next couple of weeks just so everybody knows that the Comment of the Week section is no longer going to be presented on the show. I will say the good thing being that we are getting so many comments that it's becoming nigh impossible to pick just one good comment to highlight. For example, the episode on Empire of the Ants and Phase 4 is our record breaker for comments, having at this point at least 115 comments.
If you had asked me if I thought Phase 4 versus Empire of the Ants would be the most successful in terms of like comment engagement, I would never have told you that. In fact, I had thought, maybe we shouldn't do that. It's not going to get a whole lot of eyeballs or ears on it. It's, people aren't going to be into that. But I was changed, my mind was changed rather when I read some comments about how excited several listeners were to hear our take on Phase 4. And that's why we decided to continue on doing Phase 4 versus Empire of the Ants. And now, it is our most successful episode in terms of comment engagement, and that is thanks all to you, listeners. Thanks so much. We really pride ourselves in having one of the best comment sections on the internet at GenreVision.com. If you've never commented before, we would love to see you comment this week.
Absolutely. Even though Comment of the Week is not going to be on the show anymore, we still are very much in support of our comment section being the best comment section on the internet, and we check out your comments. It's been very difficult between having such an amazing influx of comments and a little back end knowledge that Discuss has just really screwed us on being able to do Comment of the Week, because we are not getting updates on comments until weeks later.
We still want to see your comments, though. They are wonderful.
We do. And, same with commenting as a patron at patreon.com/GenreVision. You can get commenting in on the scheduling and stuff that we do. So comment away on all forums. But now let's switch over and do some currently consuming.
Nom, 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 nom.
And I'm going to start things off because it'll be kind of quick. I watched Disney's Jungle Cruise. We will link to my official review of the movie. I kind of went in expecting this will probably be kind of fun, but nothing much to talk about. Jesse Plemons will be possibly fun. I ended up disliking this movie way more than I thought I would.
Huh.
Because here's the thing. I didn't even mention this in my review, but obviously watching the trailers and stuff, it's like, yeah, none of this looks like it's actually ever in a real jungle. Even if they had location shoots for stuff, it all looks like the same kind of void spacey, Georgia green screen warehouse stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been a common refrain through certain reviews. But I didn't even think about that because I had already kind of made that assessment when I saw the trailers. Watching the actual movie was a little headache inducing because this is such a rapid fire kind of movie. I said to you, this is in contention for the most 1.5 times speed movie ever made, or at least that I've seen, because
is that why you gave it 1.5 stars?
Yeah, that might be. It is so on fast forward through, I would say 80% of the movie. And a lot of that, that first act is on such a speed bender that it was impossible to ever sit with anything about the movie. And it became legitimately annoying as it went on. It actually it was the main focus of my review because it infected every aspect of the movie. It tainted every aspect of the movie. With how quick it was trying to move through everything. I'm sure people will have a fun time because it's Dwayne Johnson and Emily Blunt, and they're being quippy and charming and bantery, and they're some of the biggest stars in these kinds of movies, and people clearly respond to them. So I'm sure people will enjoy that, but man, it was just beaten down by the pacing of it in the script and in the edit. There's other stuff. You can read my full thoughts in that review, but cannot give a recommend to Jungle Cruise except to the most undiscerning of viewers.
You know what's really fucking good though?
Yeah, well, that I was going to say what I can give my glowing recommendation to, and may end up with the official stamp of GenreVision Movie of the Year, is a movie Travis and I decided to check out. This is Food of the Gods 2, also known as Gnaw Food of the Gods Part 2.
Yeah. So when we did our Q&A episode a few weeks ago, somebody asked us what movie do you find yourself quoting most often? And I couldn't really come up with a good answer. It turns out actually it's a scene from Gnaw Food of the Gods 2, which I hadn't seen up until last week, but it's this incredible scene where these characters are talking to a giant boy named Bobby. And this woman says, Bobby, there's a man here to see you. And this 8-foot, 8-year-old comes out and is like, get the fuck out of my room. It's very funny. And I thought, well, there's no chance that the rest of the movie is going to be that good.
Well, I mean, context for the reason you quoted is because you've seen that clip before.
Yeah, that's what I mean. The clip is it's something that I had seen floating around the web. And I was like, one of these days I'll watch this movie, but goddamn, this clip is funny. But the thought was is there really a whole movie that's the like that crazy. Turns out, yeah. And it's way better than I thought it would be. Like, this movie's great.
We had such a blast watching this. It's a gnarly wackadoo effects film. It's a great creature attack movie. It's not poorly directed, which I think is the thing that sinks so many of these kinds of movies have their fun tendencies. And it's like, yeah, the effects may be really good. Yeah, the story might be really fun, but the direction is often extremely low rent because they're low budget productions, and often, just they just get the short shrift when it comes to directing. This is not the case. Gnaw, Food of the Gods Part 2 is a pretty damn well directed and good looking movie for what it is.
Yeah, it's not visionary work, but like the director, Damien Lee, did a good job. And then one of the screenwriters is credited as E. Kim Brewster, but that's a pen name. It's actually Mike Werb, who's the guy who wrote The Mask and Face Off and Darkman 3. And after reading that, it was like, oh, the pieces are falling into place here. Like, that's that same kind of brand of wackiness, because this is not a poorly written script. In fact, when it's funny, it's really funny.
We had seen the Bobby clip and we were like, well, maybe that'll be the nuttiest thing in the movie. That is not the nuttiest thing in this movie.
Astonishingly. Astonishingly.
There's a
oh my God.
There's a nightmare sequence where a man becomes a giant in the middle of a sex scene. There is a scientist who turns into like an acne melt puddle.
Yes.
There are legit great giant rat heads that get good close-ups, and
there are several scenes where giant rats are chasing people around that Drew and I were just in tears laughing at because they're so good and so funny. Gnaw, Food of the Gods 2 is a forgotten movie at this point. It's not really available in high definition on any format you might expect. You can't rent it. You can't watch it on streaming. You can't get it on Blu-ray. But there are places you can find it if you know where to look in some of the darker corners of the internet.
Yeah, drink up me hearty, yo-ho.
Yeah, this is a movie, I think, that if you like GenreVision kind of brand creature features, you have to see Gnaw, Food of the Gods 2. This is incredible.
Yeah, it's easily like little more behind the scenes stuff. Just in our relationship as friends, Travis and I have been having kind of intermittent B movie trash nights, where it's like, yeah, we just want to watch something and have fun. We don't have the intention of making content about it. It's just like, yeah, we just like watching movies together and finding these kind of gems. We've been doing that for a couple months now. This is the winner of that so far. Like,
oh yeah, it took the cake this year. Like, if we watch another movie that's this insane this year, I'll be stunned.
I will absolutely. I will eat every hat because this is a true gem in our books.
Yeah. I thought for sure, like, oh well, hey, the first act of the movie's pretty good. I wonder if it'll keep it up. Oh boy, does it. Oh boy.
Mad.
Highest recommendations. This is there's one reason why I would take a star away from it, because the ending is like a sudden like, oh my God, they're like, it seemed like they were planning on having another movie. So it ends in kind of like a Matrix Reloaded way. But otherwise, this movie's, I think, perfection. I think it's awesome.
We're just talking about it now. Like, I go watch Food of the Gods 2 again. Like,
absolutely.
So much fun. So yes, if you can get your hands on a copy of Food of the Gods 2, we give it the highest recommendation. And we hope you'll be back next week as we continue Superhero Month with a brand new release film, James Gunn's The Suicide Squad. We will be covering next week. And if you want to see all of the movies that we're going to be covering for Superhero Month, go to GenreVision.com and click on the schedule link, and you can see exactly what's on the menu for, what month is this? August. So come on back next week. As always, want to thank you so much for listening. I'm Drew Deitch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we will see you next week.
Right here on Krypton.